March 16th, 2021, and the time being 7 p.m., the meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals is called to order. At this time, please silence all electronic devices. To comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the city requests that participants in this meeting complete a voluntary anonymous survey that is available on the table in the back of the room. If you'd all stand, please pledge allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
John, would you call roll, please?
Roy? Here. Dean?
Here.
Matt?
Present?
Bill?
Here. Okay, need to approve the minutes for the November meeting, which seems like a long time ago. Are there any changes or any discussions that need to happen with that from anyone? If there are no changes, I'll make a sign that we approve the November 2020 minutes. John? Vote to approve the November 2020 minutes. All those in favor, say aye.
John, I'm going to abstain since I wasn't at the meeting.
There is no old business. Sarah, would you, on electing the new members, how do we approach that?
You just vote in president.
Turn it over, let him run it.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there nomination?
I move that we nominate Matt as president.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Matt is president.
Nominate vice
Vice
president.
president.
I'll make a motion to nominate Roy as vice president.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Roy's vice president.
All right.
New business, Sarah.
This evening we have Evan Manship here requesting a parking variance for the Old St. Mary's Church at 206 Southeast Street. I'm going to let him come forward and present, and then feel free to ask any questions of him, okay? Evan.
Good evening, y'all. Do you mind if I take my mask off so you can hear me a little bit better? That'd be all right.
That's fine.
Members of the board, neighbors, thanks very much for having me. My name is Evan Manship. I'm here to request a variance, ultimate rezone of the property, the Old St. Mary's Church located at the corner of East and McKee. We've spoken with various members of the community, including Mr. Robbins, the Director of the Economic Development Corporation, the City of Greensburg. My wife Emily and I have introduced this project in its primitive stages as an event center. We would like to utilize this community asset and a centerpiece of the City of Greensburg as ultimately a gathering place for the community. We've identified a need for this in many, many different ways, and given the past history of the church, paired with its recent vacancy for the last Lord knows how many years, this has become an imminent need for not only the community but the church itself as a redevelopment project to preserve its historic nature. My wife Emily is a GCHS graduate, 2010. So this is not just the product of my group or my company, but more of a passion project for my family and I, giving back to Greensburg as well as redeveloping an asset that's extremely important to us. In 2014, my wife and I met at Xavier University in Cincinnati. And in 2015, Emily sang in 6 different weddings at that church. So this has been a long, her father went to this church, her father's father went to this church. It's long been a piece of family history for her family. Her family is now my family, so it's extremely important to us. So one thing to take away from this meeting, this is not a big bad greedy capitalist coming in for a redevelopment project to put on his balance sheet. This is a passion project for my wife and our family. So again, the project is in its primitive stages. As you're well familiar, there are 3 different structures on the parcel. The roughly 30,000 square foot church, school, the 7,000 roughly square foot church, and the roughly 4,000 square foot secondary education building. We plan to utilize the church specifically as the event center for wedding receptions, hosting weddings, as well as corporate outings for just different meetings of any given nature. The school, as proposed, will not be touched in its first phase. This is a multi-phase project. So phase 1 will be the church, in addition to the secondary education building that we used as a kitchen of sorts for prep food and that type of thing. And then the school, just by nature of its current condition, as well as its size, will not be utilized for anything shy of storage for the time being. So the project is in its primitive stages. We're in the process of figuring out what parking looks like, needs to look like, address concerns from neighbors. But as it currently sits right now, we've assembled a dream team of folks who've worked on wedding venues in the past. Susan Glazer is our neighbor, our designer and architect. She's worked on Wall Hill Farms in Batesville, as well as, their name always escapes me, the big factory that was converted to an event venue in downtown Batesville, as well as Bruns and Gutzweiler as the contractor for the project, the same group that built the new parish for St. Mary's. So we're ecstatic, plain and simple. We're excited about the project. We would love to get as many folks on board as possible. We love your support in the parking variance as well as the rezone to a business for our event center. Happy to take questions, whatever you guys have.
How many parking places are there now?
It depends who you ask, I suppose. It's not super clearly marked at the church right now. Preemptively, as it sits, we're able to fit 36, 37, depending who you ask. And that's private, off-street parking for that parcel specifically. So the issue we bumped into here is we have essentially, call it 7,000 square feet that's going to be utilized for venue space, being that church, okay? Well, because there's so much square footage and so much density from a square footage basis packed into that parcel, we're required 200 some odd parking spaces for the time being, and obviously that's not feasible in any asset class. So we're attempting to restructure that parking as best we can, as well as work with as many neighbors as we can to make sure we're not intruding, but simultaneously providing enough parking to make it a marketable space for us. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
If I can say something
Sure.
on that note, the 200 and some parking spaces is based on a formula of 1 parking spot per every 150 square feet of floor area. I spoke with the city attorney, and it could possibly fall under a different area in our ordinance, not sure at this point. I don't think we're gonna require 280 some spots, but we're gonna have to figure out where it would fall exactly in the ordinance and come to some sort of terms on an agreed amount of parking spots.
And I think to Sarah's point, if I could chime in really quickly, I think everyone can agree it's an extremely tricky project. It's on a weird lot, 3 different buildings, tucked away in a rather residential area of town, borderline commercial residential. So it's difficult, and therefore it makes parking difficult, which makes paying for more parking difficult given the sensitivity financially of the project. So Greensburg's expressed helping out as best they can to make sure this happens. And we're working with all the different parties in a very, very close manner to make sure we can do it in an accommodating way. So I think everyone can agree that 200 some odd spots is not going to happen, but we understand that 36 is not feasible as well. So we're in the process of coming together with a more specific conclusion, hence why I'm not showing you an active parking plan as we speak.
You mentioned phase 1. What are future phases planned for, specifically the school building?
Well, the school building is the biggest bugaboo. Honestly, that's up in the air, to be honest. That's going to be served as storage for the time being, and when I say time being, there's an unknown period of time before we know what that looks like. Obviously, we want to be able to stabilize and scale eventually, but for the time being, it's going to be storage. Gun to my head, I think that school will likely be some level of other event space or gathering space similar to what we're in now. I think that would be a tremendous use of that space, especially the auditorium or the gymnasium, whatever you want to call it. A large open space can easily be converted into something, especially given the condition of where it sits. There are other folks, to my understanding, that approach it from a restaurant perspective or apartment perspective, and I can assure you that will not be the case. It's not viable for what we're attempting to do, and frankly, it's not my expertise. So, again, I don't want to commit to anything, but I would say storage or something like this.
So Evan, have you come up with anything on what you're planning to do parking-wise, or do you have any ideas thus far, or?
It's difficult. Our ideas so far go as far as, the problem here is that leasing parking space is nothing for us. You know, we need some level of long-term commitment from another landowner, or to acquire more land, or to have some level of dedicated parking elsewhere where we can have effective transportation to and from the site. So we've had ideas, including but not limited to acquiring property nearby, both vacant land and existing structures. It really depends who you ask. There are a handful of vacant lots up and down 421 that we've identified, kind of what that walk might look like, but again, that gets tricky very, very quickly. So trying to pair what's economically viable with what's marketable for the product is the biggest challenge, and that's why we're here introducing this project in a very, very primitive way.
So given your phase one of your proposed project there, what are the numbers of people that you're anticipating?
It's a good question. Our space, depends who you ask again, we're planning between maybe 100 and 200 attendees, maximum capacity per event. So we kind of, took the reverse logic of, okay, if we have 200 folks, how many folks per car, and then essentially how many vehicles can we expect at maximum capacity? And that number hovers, anywhere as little as 50 to as many as, call it 100. It just depends who you ask again. So we're sure about, gun to my head, if I had another 30, I think we'd be ecstatic. But we're not committing to really anything until we have a better understanding of what else is available. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
But if you go to a phase 2 or something and utilize those other buildings there, then again, you're gonna run into needing additional parking space.
Yes, sir. And again, that's the bugaboo of the whole project, is where do you start, where do you stop? And the question was asked earlier at a separate meeting with the city, have you considered demolishing the school? And frankly, no, sir, we've not. I don't think that's something we'd like to do. I think that carries historical significance that we'd like to stay around. And to demolish, an ancient structure like that for, pave paradise and put up a parking lot is not necessarily what's in the cards for us. So it's tricky. And if there were to be a phase 2, call it, 2 rooms like this, there's going to be additional questions asked. I think something that I'd take home if I were a disinterested neighbor tonight is a lot of the traffic, all 90% of the traffic in the events being thrown at this asset will be a wedding type of venue. So Friday nights, Saturday nights, that type of thing, where if we were to utilize the school, it will likely be a weekday type deal. So there will very rarely be an overlap between those 2 events.
Well, personally, I don't think we can make any decision tonight. I think it's gonna be tabled
Yeah,
until you come up with some kind of a plan.
Of course.
sure.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't see how we can come up, if you don't really have a number, I don't see how we can make a decision one way or the other.
It's a difficult process, and obviously other folks have found that out the hard way. How much do you jump into this with having a level of commitment from the city? And for us, our soft costs on the project to date are $15,000 some odd dollars. So how much money do we want to keep pouring into this to where it keeps getting tabled, to where we keep finding a number, to where we can't figure it out, and we just keep the big cycle moving. So just full transparency with the city, and the neighbors, and the board, we're guns blazing. We want this to happen in a bad way. And we are taking steps daily to communicate with neighbors and identify what this parking strategy might look like, because that's, in my humble opinion, that's the major problem.
Sure, but I think, go ahead.
Are there two issues? It needs to be rezoned from.
Rezoning will happen at the next meeting, the planning commission.
We don't deal with the reason.
Okay, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we really need to.
It's just the parking variance.
Right, but I think it's important that we know what those plans look like before a decision can be made.
Of course.
So, I would agree with Steve that we're gonna need to see some sort of, whether it's a B, or C plan, and how many numbers that comes up with, because, I love the idea, but frankly, I mean, for 200 people, 35 spaces is nowhere near enough.
Sure. Well, and again, I think that's the major issue. We recognize it's an issue. We did not expect an approval this evening. This is more of an introductory.
Sure.
Here's who I am, here's who the project is. And frankly, neighbors, I would encourage comments, questions, concerns on your end to address with me personally. I'm happy to be an open book for whatever you guys might need to hear, make you feel warm and fuzzy. We're wide open to it. But we recognize that completely.
Good.
Something that was brought up again in a separate meeting was, how many folks attended that church on a daily basis? How many folks were at Mass Sunday morning? And what did that parking situation look like? And that's a great question. I've been to Mass there half dozen times, and it was packed, from what I understand. We parked a little ways away on the street every time I've been. So it's not unfeasible to leave it as it sits and just cram as much as we can, in my humble opinion. But obviously, for it to be the most marketable product and achieve what we need to achieve from it, I think there needs to be more.
But when they had church there, they also had the overflow of Michigan Avenue where the dollar store is now.
And correct, and my understanding, when those started to be parceled off, the church was still operating in a way that was more crowded from a parking perspective, at least temporarily. That wasn't always the case, but yes, that's exactly right. Those were sold off separately at a later date.
Closest available ground probably would be the old Starbucks down there where Bruce Vanderbilt owns.
We're open to anything we can get our hands on.
You know what I'm talking about there in the corner.
Yes, sir.
That's the biggest piece of ground I can see.
If we got something for sale, we're buying. Let's put it that way. Is there anything else I can field from the board?
Does anyone have any more questions for Ed?
I think we need to let people that are here from the public that received letters
Sure,
or happen to.
absolutely, before we do
Yes.
anything, yeah.
Well, then I'll yield and.
Evan, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's a pleasure meeting you.
Likewise.
If there's anyone else from the audience that has questions, concerns, please come up to the podium. Anyone?
Good evening, Ron May, city engineer. Sarah and I had spoken about this site a while back, and I have a couple of thoughts to share with you. One, from my experience, I think you could expect an auto occupancy of 2 to maybe 2.2 people per vehicle for attendees at an event like this. So at 200 attendees, that's 180 plus parking spaces, plus all of the staff working the event. There you can expect an auto occupancy 1.1 maybe. They tend to be single occupant vehicles that arrive at the site. I don't know how many people would service 200 people, but 15 to 20 maybe. So there's another 15 to 20 cars. One of the ways for this to be thought about is not only about how many parking spaces can be made available, but is it appropriate to limit the size of events that would reflect the available parking? So that may be a condition you wouldn't want to think about placing on any approval that you may ever grant. And all of that discussion was without figuring out what happens to the other two buildings. The indication is that the newer building would be on the property consideration that before they do the next thing, they come back and visit with you about what that looks like and what additional parking may be necessary. What we don't want is inundation into the neighborhood. On the streets are public, so anybody's entitled to park there, but when their parking encroaches on the neighbors like dollar store, that becomes a different problem. So there needs to be caution in doing all of that stuff. I think it's a very good point that you all made. This needs a little bit more thought, and we can sit down the staff. I think, speaking for Sarah, we can sit down with them as appropriate and dig into this a little further and see what might be identified as a way to make it all fit together. Thank you.
I'm Brian Robbins, Director of the EDC here, and as Evan said, we did meet with them along with the mayor, and I just want to state that I work with a lot of different potential developers of this site. This is a very unique site, very sentimental site to the community, and one that we'd love to see reused, redeveloped within the southern corridor to our downtown. It's a welcoming location to our downtown, and honestly, this is one of the problems we're going to have to solve if any redevelopment happens on that site. It's been there for so long, and I think our ordinances have obviously developed over time and are more geared to more modern developments and such. So just wanted to stress the uniqueness of the site and the fact that those I've worked with in the past have never gotten to this point with that St. Mary's building so far. So we'd love to help out in any way, shape, or form we can, and stand to help both Edmond and the city to help make this happen. Thanks.
Good evening, Mayor Joshua Marsh. Expressing support for the project. We did meet with the Manships, as they have mentioned, and expressed a great desire to see something happen with the property. I think we're all in agreement. We would love to see it be utilized to its fullest capacity and for an asset to the community. With that, we also did express the same concerns you all have, and we have been in discussion with them about trying to find a solution that not only benefits their investment, but also the investments of the neighbors. It is my job and duty to advocate on behalf of economic development, but also all of our residents. So we've been sure to try to balance that and make sure that the precedent we set and what we do is feasible and welcoming to investment from all sorts. To Mr. Robbins' point, we do want something to happen with the site. It is a very odd piece that we are all very familiar with, and it is limited to what it is. So with that, I would, I think Steve's recommendation that we do something upon more study is very valid, and I believe the Manships have expressed great support of that idea as well. So with that, we support it. We want to be careful with what we're doing with it, but we would love to see something happen with it. Thank you.
I can ask Sarah. Sarah,
Yes.
Philip has a question there. If they do come up with something in between, are we able to schedule a meeting with the board, a special meeting, or is that something that just needs to go on? Okay.
No, I think we can schedule a special meeting if something comes up, if need be.
If it saves you time, like if you've got something that's happening in a week or something and you don't, and don't want to wait the additional 3 weeks or whatever.
Yeah, the next meeting would be April 20th. I mean, we prefer to wait till then, but if there's some sort of a timeline that you're on that we need to, we want to do the right thing,
Sure.
We don't want to hurry it, but we don't want to drag it out forever either.
I think it's up to the church. Obviously, they have all the say in the world with this, but I think, it's more important to us that we get this thing right more than we do burn a couple of weeks trying to speed the thing up. So we'll cross that bridge, in my opinion, but thank you for the
Sure.
question.
Sir, if you could just state your name, address for the record, please.
My name is Andrew Beets. I'm the business manager for St. Mary's Parish here in Greensburg. We're obviously selling the property. I'm representing the parish and the archdiocese who actually owns the property. We are in full agreement and full support of this project. To answer some of the earlier questions, the church held approximately 400 to 500 people at one sitting. We did have additional parking at the time across the street. We called it the gravel lot, which is now the Dollar General, I believe it is. And then on the west side, we had what we called a parking lot in a block building, which was sold off earlier. But we would accommodate, like I said, 400 to 500 people normally with in addition to those two lots. But from our standpoint, we're in full support. We think it's a good project and it's something that would benefit the city. So.
Is there anyone else who'd like to get up and speak or have concerns or comments?
Yes, sir. Please come forward, state your name and address in the microphone for the record, please.
Yes, sir. My name's Stephen Foster. I live right there on 326 East McKee. My driveway runs straight through to the back of that church. Is that gonna be blocked off so we can get in and out of there when this happens, or?
No.
No.
Because we wanna make sure we can get through, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I have no doubts that your driveway would not be blocked if.
Well, because
if
it
we
comes
figure
out in the parking lot back there. There's a red barn and a white barn.
Yeah.
Yes, I know exactly where you're talking about. So getting to the back of your property where you park
Right.
is right on that parking lot.
Yes, ma'am.
And where the survey shows where the property lines are now, that leaves you plenty of space to still be able to get in, and that cannot be blocked by any
Okay, yeah, we
parking
just
or anything.
wanted to make sure.
Sure.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your concern.
If there's no one else, I think we make a motion to table this discussion until next month's meeting. Hopefully Evan can bring us some ideas of additional parking.
So moved.
I'll make a motion to table it until next meeting. That time maybe I'll have more comprehensive plan.
Boy,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Phil.
Yes.
All right, Evan, we'll get,
Table to next month.
Make a motion to adjourn.
so moved, we adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, before you adjourn, may I?
Yes, sir.
I know the motion's already been made, but it'll still be effective. I wanted to take a moment and thank Steve Hamilton for his years of service. This is his last meeting with the board. We appreciate your dedication to the city and the years you've served as building inspector, and we wish you best in retirement. Thank you for being a part of the decision-making team to lead the community forward, and we wish you best in your next endeavors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.